Welcome to this latest Leading with Purpose podcast. This week, we've got maybe a slightly different guest actually to normal. It's Paul Fiddaman. He's CEO of Karbon Homes, and it provides social housing for people up in the Northeast, but also in Yorkshire, near where I grew up. And so it's brilliant to have Paul on, but his social mobility journey is really interesting. And you're going to hear how, in a sense, it's woven right back into everything that he does now. Paul, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I know this is a really busy time of year for you as well. Tell people a little bit about Karbon Homes. Just explain what it does, and we'll come on to, if you like, that footprint that it's got in communities shortly.
Sure. So Karbon Homes is a housing association, and we operate in the northeastern Yorkshire, as you say. So if you want a little strap line, it's from Berwick to Beverley, or
Very good.
something a bit like that. We have about 34,000 homes directly ourselves, but we also provide services to about 10,000 homes that belong to other organisations. So that takes us, into Cumbria and a little bit further down the Lancashire coast. So it's quite a big footprint. Somebody told me 7,000 square miles, but I don't know where that came from. So that's our geography. We are a Homes England strategic partner, which means we are actively building new homes, new affordable homes, predominantly for rent, some shared ownership in the mix there as well. And as alongside all of that, we are an active investor in communities, and that's an important part of what we do. So the place agenda is something we're very passionate about as an organisation, and it informs the way we think about the services that we provide. So we formed from a series of mergers, Justine, and as a consequence of that, we can trace our roots way back to some very small community-based organisations who were formed in the 1970s. And at the very first board meeting of one of those successor organisations, somebody came out with the immortal line, "We are about people and their housing in that order." And I think that's been a great sort of watchword for us as an organisation as we've developed and grown over the years.
So I think what's interesting, Paul, is for Karbon, and if you like, that earlier heritage, it's always had a really clear sense of what came first, which is around community, the lives that you were touching, and in a sense, that being far more important than this just pure bricks and mortar piece of what the organisation was looking after. And I want to come back to that, and in a sense, how you brought that alive now, because it's actually really interesting. And I think for a lot of other people who are involved in housing, policymakers who are interested in regeneration, I think it's very interesting to see, if you like, how proactive, but how activist you've been on making things happen for people who are living in your homes. But maybe let's go back to your own journey. I talked about that because your journey started off in Stanley, didn't it? And that's the beginning for you. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Stanley lad, born and bred, really. Apart from 3 years away at university, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, born and raised in Stanley for good and for ill, and it was an interesting time. So I was a teenager in the late 70s, early 80s. Stanley as a town grew up as a mining community, and back in the 80s there were 17 pits within walking distance of Stanley town centre. So it was the principal employment of everybody who lived there, and they were hard people, but they were great people as well. So they possessed of a great sense of humour and very self-deprecating in the way they go about things. So it was a fun place to be. But obviously the pits gradually closed down, and it became uneconomic to extract coal from that particular coal field, and the town needed to find a new sense of purpose. Concert, 8 miles up the road, was a steel town. It had a big steel works which closed down in 1980, and it very successfully managed to transition into some quite sort of tech-enabled industries and light manufacturing, and found another economic purpose, if you like, where Stanley, I think, has never quite rediscovered itself in that sense. So in the late 70s, early 80s, growing up in Stanley, there was this sense of, what are we? What are we about as a community?
Mm.
And good, well-paid jobs were hard to come by, and commuting to centres of employment wasn't easy. So,
Yeah.
it's a fairly epic bus ride to get into some of the big cities around. So, you'd be looking at an hour and a half to get into Newcastle. And if you were if you were doing a sort of reasonably low paid
Hmm.
job, it became quite a commitment to try and do that. So yeah, it's taken a long time to rediscover some sense of purpose for the community, and that I think has stayed with me. So for me, the value of believing in what was possible for us as individuals, and believing that education and all of that could help you find a way through that, and find a different sense of purpose. And that was certainly the way it worked out for me.
And you slightly skirted over going to university, but actually you went to Oxford, didn't you?
Yeah,
Did you feel? I mean, I didn't get the grades to go to Oxford or Cambridge. I probably didn't pick the right A levels and all of that, but I definitely would have felt very awkward, if I'm honest, coming from
yeah.
Rotherham, going there. And how did it feel? It must have. Did you feel
It's,
like a bit of a fish out of water, or
it
not?
was an interesting experience, and I look back now very fondly on it.
Mm.
But it came about almost by chance, Justine, because so kind of walking along the corridor at school one day, and the geography teacher, Mr. Wilson, who had a nickname which I probably shouldn't repeat on a polite podcast, he was also the careers guy in the school, and he kind of collared me on as I was walking down the corridor and said, "Oi, Fiddaman, are you thinking about going to university?" And, well, yeah, probably. Said, "Oh, it's just we've had this letter from Oxford, a college there, who are running this target school scheme,
Mhm.
and they're reaching out to schools who have no track record of sending people to Oxford. And we wondered whether you'd want to give it a go." So I went down for an interview. They said, "Yeah, interesting." Sit the entrance exam, which I then did, and got offered a place, which was amazing. And I guess I was expecting it to be, Brideshead Revisited and all of that. But the college I went to had deliberately targeted people who were not unlike me. So I found myself surrounded by other people from similar backgrounds.
And what
One
were
of
you
whom
studying?
I studied modern history, which in Oxford parlance was anything from the Romans onwards. Not wouldn't meet some people's description of modern, but you kind of know what they meant as opposed to ancient. So yeah, I had a great experience there, and felt very privileged. And it sort of bolstered that sense of belief that if you worked hard and believed in
Mhm.
yourself, then you could
Mhm.
achieve interesting things.
And you then went on to do accountancy, I think, then end up at Sunderland Football Club. And tell us a little bit about that professional journey you had before you end up going into that social housing sector you're in now with Carbon.
Yeah. So, final year at university, and you're thinking, what am I going to do with a history degree then?
Mhm.
Both my parents were teachers, so I wasn't keen to follow their path. And what else do you do with a history? Well, obviously you go and be an accountant, don't you? And that came about.
Worked for me. That's
Well,
exactly
fine.
what I did.
Yeah, yeah. So it came about largely by sort of popping along to the careers office at uni and researching and thinking, well, what can I do without a relevant qualification?
Mhm.
What could I do? And accountancy seemed a way to give you a broad business
Yeah,
education. So
totally
that was
agree. If you weren't sure which bit of business you wanted to go in,
yeah,
what sector, what you'd be good at, I just remember
absolutely,
thinking, well, I'll get another qualification under my belt and it'll be a really good way to find out more about
yeah.
different places, different companies.
That's absolutely. So, and that's exactly how it panned out. Now, I'd have to say, and Price Waterhouse, as they were back in the day, great employer. I'm not sure I was a great fit for them, Justine, if I'm absolutely honest, because
Why is
the
that?
idea,
I also went to PwC and got a very similar path, but You
Yeah.
might have been a few years ahead of me, not that much. I found
Yes.
it okay, but it was again like a fish out of water. When I don't think I've been in an office that often, but when I turned up on day one.
Yeah. So it was a strange experience for me. You know, I went out on my first audit and I didn't know what an invoice was. So it was like, what's one of them then? What do they do? So very, very green and very,
Mm.
very inexperienced. But as I went through my career there, so I kind of ended up, you know, kind of middle management
Hmm.
in the organization, and thought, you know what, I think I'd enjoy the kind of doing more than the auditing bit of accountancy.
Yeah. I got to the stage, I don't know about you, Paul, where I sort of wanted to stay somewhere. You know, I was going to some quite interesting businesses, and but then I'd
Yeah,
go off to the next one, and you didn't have a sense of being able to achieve anything that you could see
yeah,
come through.
yeah. It's that old adage, isn't it, of the auditor being the people who go in after the fight and bayonet the wounded. So it just didn't feel like you were originating anything or doing
Although we
anything.
should say to anyone thinking of going into
It's
auditing
a
that
fantastic
it's still
career
a
and it can
really
open up
great
all sorts of
career
possibilities.
that, as Paul and I demonstrate, can lead you on to
Yes,
all sorts of different paths. But
absolutely.
yes, yeah,
And thank you for
I think for both of us, probably it wasn't something we would do. It was the first part of a career, but not the whole.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And as a sort of general business education and
Mm.
as a launching pad for going on to do other things, yeah, absolutely fantastic
It's
and,
almost
you know, good training.
it's almost as close as you can get to a sort of apprenticeship MBA without
Yeah,
actually calling it
yeah,
that, because you just
yeah,
do everything, go everywhere. And, you know, if I think about my intake at PwC, people went on to do all sorts. I mean, development, you know, as in like building developer,
yeah.
all sorts, actually.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, having reached that conclusion, and it's interesting what you learn about yourself as you go through these
Hmm.
processes, isn't it? So, it, I suppose, came as a little bit of a surprise to me that something around job fulfillment would be as important as it
Hmm.
turned out to be. So, an opportunity came to go and join Sunderland Football Club as their accountant, finance director. I went there. It was great fun. It was quite a glamorous world compared to what I'd been used to. And, you know, you're mixing with stars and people I'm a Sunderland supporter, I should confess, I suppose.
Doing very well this season as things stand.
It's going
Amazing.
touch wood because we've got Newcastle on Sunday. So, you know, but yes, it's been an encouraging start and we're not looking like relegation certainties, which I think a few of us feared we might be
Mm.
as we went into the season. So went in there, had a lot of fun, but also there was some frustration because at the time we were bumping along in the lower reaches of what was the championship or what is now
Hmm.
the championship. And he is sat in a boardroom full of millionaires thinking, oh, get your hand in your pocket and buy some players, you know, which is not the right way to run a football club as it happens. But as a supporter, it's got a little bit frustrating. So the chairman of the time, a guy called Bob Murray, was a big believer in the club as a community anchor institution.
Hmm.
And he
Hmm.
would very happily tell Sunderland City Council that, you know, 95% of the times they get mentioned as a city are because of the football club. So, you know, apocryphal stat, but an interesting one
Yeah.
nevertheless. And you
Yeah.
sort of get his point, don't you? So he was a big believer in that community input role, and an opportunity came along to join the board as a non-exec of a housing association. And I didn't really know what they did, but I thought, you know what, that'll look good on the CV. I'll give that a whirl.
Mm. And as you
And it
said, you
was
clearly were thinking, what else am I interested in? And, you know, it's a very natural thing to keep on exploring new opportunities.
absolutely. But what emerged as a consequence of that decision was this realization that, you know what, if you can work in a way where you feel your talents are being deployed to do something useful,
Hmm.
that adds value to society more broadly,
Hmm.
that's a very fulfilling and rewarding space to be in as a human being. So I discovered in myself a value set that I'd probably only been dimly aware of until that point. And it was really interesting. So an opportunity came to join the housing sector full-time executive. So I went across to a relatively small housing association as their finance director and have remained in the sector for the 30 years since. There you go.
I mean, it does feel quite parallel. Actually. I always feel like, so I just always wanted to go into business. I wanted to earn lots of money, be very successful. And I think I had a bit of a surprise because I got into that career. It was going really well. And I was in pharmaceuticals. I love pharma and health and
Mhm.
all of that. I found it fascinating. But actually, what all the things I thought were going to make me happy didn't. I was able to get a bigger car and, I could see that I'd be able to buy a nice place to live or whatever. And I'd always thought that those things would be what maybe gave me some sense of
Yeah.
achievement, accomplishment. And I began to think, they didn't really give me any spark. I genuinely remember thinking, "Oh, I thought I was going to get more from this success,
Yeah. Yeah.
and for me, I got
Interesting.
more involved in my community, and that was my sense of fulfillment. And
Yeah.
a bit like you making the switch into properly into housing, in the end, I end up thinking, I like doing all this community stuff, and it takes me down this route to becoming an MP. But I think one of the lessons, certainly from your story, is listening to that kind of inner voice in a way of what you really love really makes a difference. And so now, scrolling forward, you're chief exec of Karbon Homes. And it's, I think, doing some really interesting approaches, particularly in Stanley, where you grew up, also in Biker. So let's get into how you're bringing that people, first, home second, or housing second, how you're now bringing that to life in literally the community that you grew up in. Let's kind of dig into that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we have this underpinning philosophy. So Carbon was formed from a merger, 2008 and a half years ago, and we brought three existing housing associations together, and we were having that debate: what shall we call ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
So we did a lot of consultation. We talked to customers, we talked to non-execs, we talked to colleagues. And the thing that kept recurring in those conversations was this idea of us as a foundation stone for people to go on and build their own successful futures.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I both know, Justine, that a home, a stable place to put down roots, to feel part of the community, to have your kids reliably and dependently going to a decent school nearby, and to have access to, employment and leisure opportunities. That's so important. It is really a foundation stone for everything that you go on to achieve in life, I think, and has great important outcomes for health and educational attainment and all the rest of it. And the absence of it puts a big dent in your ability to engage with some of those things. But this idea of us as a foundation, not as some kind of Victorian organisation who did stuff for people, but we're an enabler. We're there as a reliable partner to provide a platform for people to build from. So we Googled foundation. It had been done. So we started thinking, well, what's a metaphor for what we're trying to say here? And we got into this idea of chemical elements as building blocks for life. And then
Mm-hmm.
this idea that carbon is an element that is present in life, in all life. And then the ad folk said, if you put a K on the front of that, you'll be sorted. So that's where that came from. But the serious point underpinning
Yeah.
that is
Yeah. It's it's the
we
strong foundations piece, isn't it?
correct, absolutely. So just the building block, just for us to be an organisation. We 4 or 5 years ago, we began to think, well, are we doing enough to justify that philosophy? Are we living up to that? So we started thinking about our place strategy and what we could do to really reinforce that. We had some great things going on in the organization. So we have a money management and debt advice service to help people manage their finances better. We had an employability offer to help people connect with the world of
Mm-hmm.
work. And we had a well-established and successful route to dish out small grants to community organizations. But we felt we needed to get some coherence and some direction into some of that. So we developed our firm foundations approach, And we decided that we would pilot in 2 areas where we have a high concentration of homes. So the Biker Estate is an iconic estate in Newcastle, which was designed in the 60s and 70s by an architect called Erskine, who was English but had grown up in Scandinavia and
Mm-hmm.
had adopted a lot of kind of design principles from where he grew up. So he brought some of that across to Biker. So it's a really interesting, eye-catching estate and a very diverse community. That combination of factors ultimately led to it being Grade 2 listed. So
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because communities are dynamic, aren't they? And they change and they
Mm.
evolve. And if you list something, you're trying to preserve it in aspect a little bit.
Yeah.
So there are things that the community would like to do there, which bump up against historic England's view of what the estate is really supposed to be about. So we have 90% of all of the homes on this estate. So there are 2,000 homes on the estate. We got 1,800 of them, or thereabouts. As I say, a very diverse community and a very interesting community. But it had been a little bit unloved and a little bit forgotten about for 20 years or so before the council ultimately decided to transfer it to what became Biker Community Trust, which
Mm-hmm.
joined the Carbon Group 6 or 7 years ago now, so that we could release some resource to help them invest in the things that mattered in that community. They did a lot of community consultation, and there was a bit of cynicism and people going, yeah, we've heard this before
Yeah, yeah.
and nobody's ever done anything. So we wanted to be the organisation that went in and actually delivered on those promises. The main thing that people were worried about or kind of talking to us about was you'd categorise it as the look and feel of the place. So it just felt uncared for, uninvested in,
Yeah.
and people felt as a consequence of that they were ignored, forgotten, left behind, and not living to their full potential. So we identified a series of investment opportunities on the estate just to kind of help them to deal with that sense of not feeling cared about. And we're sort of partway through that investment, but the bits that we have done are making a real difference. So customer satisfaction on the estate is really high.
Mm-hmm.
People are enjoying the changes that they're seeing. They're impatient
Mm.
to see it roll out on the whole estate, of course. So there's lots more to do there, but it's starting to have an impact,
Yeah.
and it's starting to restore a sense of pride in the estate. Stanley's very different. Stanley, I've talked about Stanley, so I don't need to rehearse that anymore. It's a former mining community, etc., etc. But because of we were the recipients of the stock transfer from what was Derwentshire District Council back in the day. Uh, we have 25% of all of the homes in Stanley, so we've got a significant footprint
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
which I
Huge.
think brings a sense of obligation because you are an anchor institution, you're an important institution, and because your principal activity is affordable housing, you're going to be there for the long term. So as local authority colleagues and other agencies have, through financial necessity, withdrawn a little bit from that community,
Mm-hmm.
we find ourselves as the organisation that has the key partnerships, the key convening power, and the
Yeah.
ability
You're the
to
catalyst, really, aren't you? You know, if things
yeah
are going to happen, they probably happen with and
indeed.
through Carbon
Yeah,
Homes.
yeah, absolutely. So it was an opportunity to think about housing-led regeneration. So
Mm-hmm.
we did some significant consultation. The priorities that people identified there were around the look and feel of the high street, and people again kind of referencing this idea that it's underpopulated. There's a lot of vacancy. That retail is dying on the high street there. The nighttime economy has shrunk. There's a lot of younger people with not much for them to do, so they kind of mill about and they're not really doing anything that I didn't do when I was a kid roaming the streets of Stanley. But it just creates a sense of anxiety on people. The front street becomes a place that feels quite intimidating after dark. So we decided that we needed to do something in there. So we've had a sort of two-pronged attack really. One is we've acquired a a key building on the front street, which was a former school, and it was falling into disrepair and literally started to collapse into the street at one point. So we've acquired that with the intention of demolishing it, and that demolition
Hmm.
is now underway. It's took a little while because we had to make sure the bats were okay. So it goes. But the idea is we will try and bring some economic activity back onto the front street. So potentially a residential solution
Yeah.
or potentially a kind of community and business hub
Mm.
solution,
Mm.
but both with the intention of bringing people back onto the front street who will spend money there and contribute to economic activity.
And I guess sort of updating it, because actually what people want to do on the high street, it's much more social now, isn't it? You know, it's
Yeah.
not a transaction center as it used to be, because people can do all the transaction or a lot of them online. People want something different, don't they,
Yeah,
from that street now?
they do indeed. I think that nighttime economy piece is really important. When I was an older kid, obviously, but there was a lot to do there. There were a couple of nightclubs, there were youth clubs, there were all sorts of things you could do. Those opportunities are much more restricted now as the nighttime economy's sort of contracted. Yeah, the idea is if you can get some people back in and get some economic activity, make the place look and feel cared for, make it feel a
Mhm,
bit safer, perhaps
mhm,
find some diversionary activities for the younger people. We've also been working with the town council and the local authority around the idea of just daft things like reintroducing a food market
mhm.
periodically. So there are reasons for people to go and walk up and down the front street. And, as a consequence of that, they might go and pop into a shop or buy a cup of coffee or whatever else goes with that. So just trying to stimulate a bit of a sense of vibrancy and a reason for people to go and spend time in the town felt to us like it was something we could do. And as a consequence of that, just rebuild that sense of pride that we're talking about.
That all complements other work that you do with residents, doesn't it? Around employability. I think there's some really interesting stuff around that, even around transport. You talked right at the beginning of this around how do it's not that easy necessarily to get to jobs.
Yeah.
So I think maybe it's interesting. So we've talked a little bit about, if you like, the physical investment
Yeah.
and the physical infrastructure. Maybe let's talk a bit about that social infrastructure that you build and that social capital that you build up through what you do on carbon.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, on Stanley Front Street, we have a building which we use as a hub for some of our social investment activity.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there's a team of colleagues based there, or a couple of teams in fairness. So the employability team use that as their headquarters. And I mentioned the importance of convening. I think it would be a mistake, even as an anchor institution, to think you can do everything yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really important to connect with partner organisations like the local authority, like community groups. And our hub is over the road from the Job Centre Plus.
Mhm.
Their staff come and spend time in the hub and talk to people about employment opportunities. The theory being that people might be a little bit intimidated going into the job centre because associated with, being hauled in to talk about benefit sanctions or whatever it might be, not necessarily the most welcoming place you could spend time.
Feels a
So
bit
just giving,
formal, basically.
yeah, absolutely. So I was going to say, just giving people the opportunity to interact on a more informal level so that you can build a relationship of trust and you can start to get people thinking about training opportunities that might be available to them. So we got people there who will help with interview skills. We got people there who will help with, you know, math skills, form filling. We've got access to community groups who can provide people with an interview suit. All manner of
Yeah.
low level interventions that can help just make those connections for people again. So it's an important facility. We also run from there what we call Silver Talk, which is a telephone befriending service. So largely run by volunteers,
Mhm.
including our customers. And
Mhm.
it's targeted at people who are experiencing loneliness, isolation, perhaps are getting on a bit, perhaps they don't get out as much as they used to, perhaps a partner's no longer with them, and just having a volunteer ring them up a couple of times a week and just have a
Mm,
natter about what was on TV last
mm,
night and what they're going
mm,
to have for the tea and all of that stuff. Nothing, kind of heavy or no other purpose than just to provide them with a little bit of contact and a little bit of inclusion. So that's a great service. As I say, it depends heavily on volunteers, and I think a lot of carbon staff get involved in that as well. And most of them would tell you it's as rewarding for them as it is beneficial for the people on the other end of the call, because
mm.
really is a good service to provide, I think.
Where do you see, I mean, obviously you've developed a lot and you've got your plans on the physical infrastructure in Stanley. When you look ahead to sort of next 5 years, maybe 10 years, where do you see that next phase of the carbon offer going? I mean, I guess there's learnings from what you've done already.
Yeah.
It's got to be financially sustainable at the end of the day. And so how do you kind of bring it all together to chart a way forward?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think the housing sector is like most public services is feeling pressure.
Mhm.
Cost of building stuff has gone up by 40% in the last 3 years in our geography, and rents haven't kept pace. So there's an invitation just to look at some of that critically and think, well, what is it that we do that adds value?
Mhm.
Could we do it differently?
Yeah.
Could we leverage more from partnerships?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think fundamentally, as an organisation, we've arrived at a view that this is really important and this is core business for us. It's not the nice to have stuff that you should switch off when times are tough. If you own 4,000 homes in a town, you want the town to be successful, don't you? Because that's a big investment, and if people don't want to live there, or it's a challenging place to let houses, then your portfolio isn't going to thrive in the way that you'd want it to. So there's an element of enlightened self-interest in the business case for investing in community in that way as well. So, if people are more prosperous, more settled, then they'll better be able to pay their rent and remain part of a stable community and put down roots. So it's a virtuous circle, I think.
Yeah. And it sort of plays out over the longer term. So it's not something this year's profit and loss is particularly going to reflect. It's absolutely generational, isn't it? And I guess just to finish, if you were talking to young people growing up in Stanley now, just like you did, I guess what would you say to them? You've had a fantastic journey. What's that what's that message you'd have for, a young Paul growing up in Stanley now?
Yeah, I think there's something about believing in yourself and believing in your potential.
Mhm.
Work hard and understand the value of education, because it can take you to some amazing places and take you down paths you never thought you'd tread. So believe in yourself, work hard, and aim high.
Mhm. Well, that is a brilliant point on which to finish the podcast. Paul Fiddaman, CEO of Carbon Homes, it's just been brilliant having you on. I love, and I think it's really powerful, the whole full circle around literally now, in part, going back into your own community and helping to regenerate it from the inside. And I think that's a really important point as well. So we're really proud having you part of the Purpose Coalition. It's full of businesses and organizations like yours that are really showing how there are so many solutions outside Westminster. So I'm looking forward to hopefully plugging some of those models that you use and some of those solutions into that system. But in the meantime, thank you for the time on the podcast today. It's been fantastic.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Justine.